Okay, this is number 7 in our series. So we've been going through the book of Joshua, and if you just read through it, sometimes you would think that Joshua is just a plain old history book, that there's nothing there that we can glean of any spiritual substance that would benefit us. And the fact is, it's just not true. It is filled with principles, illustrations, examples, commands that we can even use today and apply in this dispensation. Even though we're not under law, some of these things are trans-dispensational truths. Now, verse number 1 of chapter 8, we have the Lord speaking to Joshua. Now, you'll remember that for a short while there, they were not on speaking terms. And the reason was Israel sinned. And instead of him praying and asking God's strategy and blessing and direction in taking of Ai, they were riding an arrogant high, as it were. They're full of pride. We beat Jericho, and so we can take Ai. So he didn't even pray. He didn't ask God for any type of plan to take the city. He just sent out some men to have a reconnaissance mission and come back, and they said, oh, that's just a small thing. Just send about 2,000 or 3,000 men up there. And so the 2,000 or 3,000 men attacked the city. The men of Ai came out and killed 36 of them in the process and chased them all the way home. And so Joshua is whining and crying and, oh, poor me and pitiful me type deal. Until finally God snapped back and said, stand up, act like a man, quit lying on your face in the ground. The reason that you cannot go forward is Israel has sinned. You've taken of the accursed thing. Now the word accursed there is actually devoted. It became accursed when somebody took what belonged to God. It was devoted to him and to his cause. And of course, that is a principle. If things are devoted to the Lord, even whether it's individual or a group effort, God sometimes will withhold his blessing and his power and his victory, and even give us a smarting defeat, as it were, because we've sinned. And so Joshua had to go through the process of finding who it was. It was Achan. And then they took the whole family, because all of them knew what he had done, and all of them planned on getting in a little bit of an inheritance here with the Babylonian garment, with the wedge of gold, with the shekels of silver, and he hid them. And so all of them ended up being stoned and set on fire and having a heap of stones covering them. They call it the Valley of Achor. That's one of those things where there is a name invented in the Bible that is geared to bring to mind what happened there. It means the place where Achan was judged. And so anybody that would be passing by or learning their geography would have to learn about the Valley of Achor and why it's named Achor. Now, that brings us then to verse number 1. The Lord said to Joshua, "Fear not and be not dismayed." Now, why should the Lord tell Joshua these things? Wasn't he this mighty man of valor? I mean, wasn't he the head of all Israel and these fighting men that just whipped Jericho? Well, yes, that's true, but you have to remember that he just suffered a humiliating defeat. So number one, he is saying, fear not, looking in the past. Yes, you did a wrong thing back there. And now you're going to have to go and face Ai again. So you've got a past and a future. Don't fear because of what happened here. You're going to have to face these men, but you faced them before without my blessing. Now, if you're in fellowship, just move on. You don't have to fear the enemy. And be thou dismayed. Remember when this happened that the hearts of the people melted. They were discouraged. Joshua probably was in some sort of a depression at this point. Don't be dismayed, God is saying. Take all the people of war with thee. Now, remember that that's one of the things that Joshua here is famous for. Basically, that all the people will take all the land. It's a team effort. It's a group effort. And I liked what our brother Joe Watkins said about that on Sunday. That it takes more than one person, whatever you're doing, and in a group effort, everybody has to more or less think alike, understand their part, pull their own weight to do what's required of them in this effort. So take all the people of war with thee, arise and go to Ai. See, I have given it into your hand. Now note the four things he gives. Now these are important. The reason that they are important is because there's a correlation with us. Number one, the king of Ai. Number two, his people. Number three, his city. And four, his land. Now, if you'll hold your place there and come with me to the book of Ephesians, chapter 1. What is the correlation? It is simply this: that though we are not entering Canaan land as Joshua and Israel did, though we are not taking literal physical property and people, defeating people, there is a correlation in that we are taking land. We are obtaining a dominion and an inheritance, and we are defeating other beings, the fallen angels. Verse number 3. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who has blessed us with all spiritual blessings in heavenly places. Now, note, he told Joshua, I've given you these four things. He's telling us, I'm going to give you these four things. What's that? Well, over every quadrant of space, every bit of territory, there is an angelic king. There is a throne. That king has a people or an angelic clan. And most of which followed these fallen angels in their revolt against Jesus Christ. And every one of these clans has cities and towns. That's what the Jerusalem is. It says it's got an innumerable company of angels there. Angels live in cities. They sit on thrones. They have a distinct home. And lastly, they have a planet or land. And so there is an exact correlation there, except one is physical and the other is spiritual. That's why in chapter 2, verse 6, told Joshua, I've given you the king, his people, throne, city, and so forth. He raised us up together and made us sit together in heavenly places in Christ Jesus. We as well get thrones, but we have to face our enemies. That comes from Ephesians chapter 6. And then verses 11 and 12. Put on the whole armor of God that you might be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. The wiles are simply his strategies, his methods, the means by which he defeats us, not himself personally. You've got to be a super saint, as we've studied before, to be attacked of the devil. Paul was, Job was, Christ was, and the like. However, he has plenty of henchmen in a hierarchy, starting from him on down, with whom we have to deal. Verse 12. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood. They did, we don't, but the principle's the same. We still have to wrestle or fight against principalities, powers, rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in heavenly places. Now, that's the whole point of our studying Joshua here. As God has given them the land, he has given us the heavenly places. But what do they have to do? Fight for it to take it. What do we have to do? The same thing. It is a spiritual warfare, a spiritual battle, every day of our lives. All right? So, verse number 2. Similarity between Ai and Jericho. You shall do to Ai and her king as you did to Jericho and her king. Now, we're going to see here in just a little bit that the king of Jericho and the king of Ai epitomize or symbolize two different things. Those in Jericho epitomize actually the fallen angels. But as we get moving here to Ai, the king of Ai and his people are going to symbolize the old sin nature. But if you're going to win victory for the Lord, you have to win over all your enemies. And it's the world, the flesh, and the devil. So all of these enemies are going to be faced here as they're taking the land. Only the spoil thereof and the cattle thereof shall ye take for a prey to yourself. All right. So God gives spoil to those who are faithful. If you will, hold your place here and turn to the book of Romans, chapter 8. The book of Romans, chapter 8, and verse number 37. Here is the principle for us. Joshua is going to go in there, and he is going to conquer. Now, when it came to Jericho, there are things there that belong to God, and therefore nobody could take of that spoil. The spoils of war there were to go into God's treasury. But now, when it comes to Ai, there are going to be those who live in Ai, and the old sin nature is going to make their lives a heap of ruins. That's what Ai means. And it symbolizes the old sin nature. Anything the old sin nature produces is worthless. It's a hill of beans, we say, and in illustration, modern day illustration or saying. But when they go in there, therefore, they are more than conquerors. In other words, they do more than just defeat their foes, they take their possessions. All right, Romans chapter 8, verse number 37. Here's the principle for us. In all these things, we are more than conquerors through him that loved us. Every time we defeat a demon or a fallen angel in our lives, every time, though they throw it all at us in this warfare, we stand, having done all, and we stand. We not only conquer them, but the land we're standing on becomes our possession. And that's the phrase, more than a conqueror. You just don't defeat your enemy, you get his spoils. I mean, if the guy's worth $1 million, that becomes yours, personal property for all eternity. And so it gives incentive, if you will. Let's turn to the book of Matthew. Book of Matthew, chapter 27. And wait a second here. I'm in the wrong thing here. Chapter 25 is what I wanted, not 27. Verse 14. Now note, this is the principle. They lived in Ai. They possessed a city. They had treasures there. But again, these people are indicative of those who live their lives for the flesh. And so thinking that worldly possession is going to get them something. So here's what Jesus said, verse 14, the kingdom of heaven is as a man traveling to a far country. He called his own servants and delivered unto them his goods. Every person, whether saved or unsaved, is responsible for what they own and using it for the Lord or not. He gave one 5 talents, the other 2 talents, and the other 1, every man according to his ability. He that received the 5 talents went and traded, and so forth, and made other 5 talents. Same with the 2. And the one, however, digged in the earth and hid his Lord's money. Instead of utilizing what God gave him for his glory and increase, he just wasted it. And so when the Lord came, verse number 19, to reckon with them, he that received the 5 talents and the other 5 talents, the Lord said, well done, verse number 21, you good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a few things. I'll make you ruler over many things. The same thing he did with the one with 2 talents. Verse 23 tells us he says the very same thing. And in just proportion, he gets rewarded. But to the one who received the 1 talent, the Lord, he talked to the Lord and said, I knew you were a hard man, reaping where you had not sown, gathering where you had not strawed. I was afraid, and I hid thy talent in the earth. And the Lord calls him a wicked and slothful servant. You should have, therefore, says verse 27, put your money to the exchangers, then at my coming I would have received mine own with interest or usury. Take therefore the talent. Now this is a great principle. Take therefore the talent from him, and give unto him which hath the 10 talents. So here's a guy who had 5, he earned 5 more, and because the other guy wasted his life in sinfulness, he got, this faithful guy got that talent. For unto everyone that has shall be given, and shall have abundance. But from him that has not shall be taken away even that which he has. Okay, let's go from here to 2 Chronicles chapter 20. Those who are unfaithful with their possessions will eventually give them up, the spoils of war, to those who are faithful. That's pretty neat, huh? That's an incentive, a motivation for being faithful to the Lord. Okay, we'll read the first 4 verses of 2 Chronicles chapter 20. Came to pass after this also the children of Moab and the children of Ammon, and with them beside the Ammonites, came against Jehoshaphat to battle. And they knew this multitude was coming, and Jehoshaphat feared, says verse 3, and set himself to seek the Lord. And Judah gathered themselves to ask help of the Lord. Even out of all the cities of Judah they came to seek the Lord, okay? So here we've got an enemy coming. And we need help because they are almost like an overwhelming flood. They're heading this direction. We have no way of stopping them unless you intervene. So what does God do to these faithful people? Verse number 23. For the children of Ammon and Moab stood up against the inhabitants of Mount Seir, utterly to slay and destroy them. And when they had made an end of the inhabitants of Seir, every one helped to destroy another. God sent, because these people had asked his help, they really didn't even have to battle. God sent a situation there where they attacked one another, and every single one of them was killed. And when Judah came toward the watchtower in the wilderness, they looked to the multitude, and behold, they were dead bodies fallen to the earth, and none escaped. Every single one of them was dead. But now, every one of them carried his inheritance on his back, as it were, had his riches with him. And when Jehoshaphat and the people came to take away the spoil of them, they found among them in abundance both riches with the dead bodies, precious jewels, which they stripped off for themselves. They were the victors. The spoil of the war goes to the conquering army, more than they could carry away. And they were 3 days in gathering of the spoil. It was so much. Okay, so we come back to Joshua chapter 8, and we've learned a principle now. And that principle is simply this. If you remain faithful, your enemies are eventually going to fall, and everything they own is going to become yours, your possession. So, verse number 3. Or last part of verse 2, it says, lay thee an ambush for the city behind it. And you say, oh, this doesn't sound real good, an ambush for the city. That God would actually lay an ambush. That's kind of deceitful, isn't it? No. The principle is this. He will take the wise in their own craftiness. You're so smart, says God. Okay. Smartest man in the world. That's fine. I'm going to take you in your own craftiness. You see, they've already chased away Israel one time, and they're thinking in their head they can do it again. See, that's crafty. We don't have to be afraid. We beat these guys once. We can do it the very same way the second time. Little did they know that there's been a change in their enemy. When their enemy attacked them the first time, they were weak and powerless because God was cursing them. When they came against them the second time, God was for them. And if God is for us, who can what? Be against us. So he's taking the wise and their old craftiness here, and as is a principle. He's laying an ambush. So Joshua arose and all the people of war to go up against Ai. And Joshua chose out 30,000 mighty men of valor and sent them away by night. Now, we're going to see here a tremendous strategy in the form of a cross. Now, with Jericho, it was a circle. And again, God is Olam. He is the circle God. And they encompassed the city, and so when the walls fell, they just came straight in and got them. This time, it's going to be in the shape of a cross. So he sends 30,000 men to the west of Ai. He commanded them, saying, Behold, you'll lie in wait against the city, even behind the city. Don't go far from the city, but be ready. I and all the people that are with me will approach unto the city, and it's going to come to pass, when they come out against us as at the first, that we will flee before them. For they will come out after us till we have drawn them away from the city. For they will say, They flee before us as at the first. Therefore we will flee before them. So, that is going to be their thinking. God is telling Joshua, and Joshua is predicting this is going to happen. God is taking the wise in their own craftiness, and they're going to come out. Now, God has done this several times. For example, on the cross of Calvary, who instigated Jesus going to the cross? It says that Satan entered into Judas. Judas turned him in, all in an attempt to go to the cross. He kept saying, I'm going to go there and I'm going to be crucified. Because this is the plan and program. And Satan keeps pushing Jesus to the cross. And all the forces of hell are gathered round to see this man die in defeat. If you've ever read the book by Cornelius Sam, Satan in Derision, Satan fooled himself. God took him in his own craftiness. If I can just get this guy out of the way, if I can just get him killed, I win, you see. And so he did everything to get Jesus Christ to the cross. And he must have shouted with joy and danced with glee as he saw this guy dying on the cross. I'm rid of him finally. I've conquered my enemy. A little beknownst to him that while he was dying on the cross, that God was in the process of reconciling the universe back to himself, dying for men's sins so that they could be saved. And at the one and the same time, because he died the death of the cross, God highly exalted him, gave him a name which is above every name. And on the third day when he arose, Christ just said, I'm back. And Lucifer now had a real problem. So he drew them in. Oh, by the way, in the middle part of the tribulation period, it says that the 144,000, the man-child, are taken up. What draws these angels? All the angels of the universe. God doesn't even have to have a mop-up campaign to find all of the fallen angels of the universe come to the earth to try to prevent this man-child. And as soon as the man-child's caught away, guess what Michael and his angels do? War to throw them or cast them down on the earth so that none of them is missing. God laid an ambush for them. Okay, so verse number 7. Then shall ye rise up from the ambush and seize upon the city, for the Lord your God will deliver it to your hand. It shall be when you've taken the city that you'll set the city on fire according to the commandment of the Lord. Okay, now one of the reasons that he set these men on the west side of Ai was to take the city itself. Now, there's nothing more disheartening to an armed force if you take their headquarters, or disheartening to a person if you have destroyed their home, and they have no place now to go back to. And so this contingent of soldiers was set to destroy their homes by fire. All right? Joshua therefore sent them forth and went to lie in ambush and abode between Bethel and Ai. Now here's a neat little thing. Remember what Bethel means? Bethel means the house of God. Ai means the heap of ruins. It was by Bethaven, the house of vanity. And so, and it's too late. God had given up these people. These people are not going to be able to go to the house of God anymore. It's too late. God has set an army against them, and they're between Bethel and Ai, so that there's no recourse for them now. They're going to die. It is a fight to the death. And of course, that's part of the angelic conflict. Once Satan agreed to the terms of the angelic challenge, there's no such thing as a peace treaty. It's too late. You're either going to win or you're going to lose it all. And those were the terms. All right, let's push on here. Joshua rose up early in the morning and numbered the people, and went up, he and the elders of Israel, before the people to Ai. And all the people of war that were with him, went up and drew nigh to the city, and pitched on the north side of Ai. Now, you'll remember how we looked in when Israel took Jericho. There were 4 sections. 1, the men of war. 2, the priests that blew the ram's horns. 3, the priests that carried the ark. And then what was called the rear reward. So you have the armed men and then the regular people. Joshua took the armed men north of the city. So now you've got a contingent west of the city. You've got a contingent north of the city. You've got a contingent east of the city. And I'll show you here how they get across and it becomes south. Let's continue to read. The rear reward is east. The men of war are north. The contingent to take the city is west. All right, verse number 11. And all the people, even the people of war that were with him, went up and drew nigh the city, and came before the city, and pitched on the north side. Now there was a valley between them and Ai. Here's Ai. Here's Bethel. They cannot get to the house of God. There's no forgiveness. It's too late. They've hardened their hearts. It's a done deal. They're either going to kill Israel or Israel's going to kill them. To prevent them from getting to the house of God, Joshua stations 30,000 men here. He then takes the rest of the men of war and he goes north of the city of Ai, and there's a valley between them. Now, that's an interesting phrase. You remember whenever David was meeting Goliath, it says that the Philistines were on the mountain on this side, Israel's on the mountain on this side, and there was a what? Valley between them. So it becomes like a Super Bowl, as it were. It's a fight to the finish. Every eye is going to be there because that's where the people of Ai are going to be destroyed, in this valley. It is a fight to the death, and only one group is going to be the victor. All right. Then he did something else here. He took about 5,000 men and set them to lie in ambush between Bethel and Ai on the west side of the city. Now, this is another group of men. The 30,000 are going to go directly to the city, but north of the city and west of the valley is where he sets these 5,000 men. And the reason being is there's going to be a crunch here from all sides in just a little bit. Where are we? And it came to pass, when the king of Ai saw it, that they hasted and rose up early. The men of the city went out against Israel to battle, he and all his people at a time appointed. And he did not know that there were liers in ambush against him in the city. And Joshua and all Israel made, as it were, as if they were beaten before them, and they fled by the way to the wilderness. And all the people that were in Ai were called together to pursue after them. And they pursued after Joshua and were drawn away from the city. Every single person in that city is being drawn away and into that valley, you see. And it's God's way of taking the wise in their own craftiness. Okay, let's move on. Verse number 18. The Lord said unto Joshua, stretch out your spear that is in thy hand toward Ai. for I will give it into thine hand. And Joshua stretched out the spear that he had in his hand toward the city. And the ambush arose quickly out of their place, and they ran as soon as he had stretched out his hand, and they entered into the city and took it, set it on fire. When the men of Ai looked behind them, they saw, and behold, the smoke of the city ascended up to heaven, and they had no power to flee. Here's the rear reward east. Here's the men of war north. Here's the 5,000 soldiers west of the valley. Here are the 30,000 who come into the city. Once they start burning it, they then come north. The northern contingent comes south. The eastern contingent goes west. The western contingent comes east. And all the people of Ai are stuck right in the middle. So, last part of verse number 20. The people that fled to the wilderness turned back upon their pursuers. And when Joshua and all Israel saw that the ambush had taken the city, and the smoke of the city ascended, they then turned again and slew the men of Ai. And it says here in verse 22, they were in the midst of Israel, some on this side, some on that side, and they smote them so that none could escape. Now, we're going to go from here and just touch a bit on the old sin nature. It is our contention that the people of Ai reflect the old sin nature. They lived in a heap of ruins. That's what the old sin nature does. Everything that it produces goes up as wood, hay, and stubble, as worthless. Even though they owned it, even though it gave them great pleasure, it became worthless. So, they smote them. Every bit of the old sin nature either has to be neutralized or eliminated. And so, in our case, until we get our glorified bodies, it must be neutralized to glorify the Lord. And in our case, if we're going to spend eternity with God, it has to be eliminated if we're going to glorify the Lord. So what did they do? They killed the whole bunch. But what did they do to the king? Note verse 23. This is important, and you'll see it here in a minute. The king of Ai they took alive. Now, why did they do this? Because he represents the living principle of the old sin nature in our members. If you hold your place here and turn to the book of Romans, chapter 7. Verse number 9. For I was alive without the law once, but when the commandment came, sin, the old sin nature, revived, and I died. You see, we either kill it or it kills us. That's the way that it's so designed. It is an enemy within, and it brings a curse on us. Sin, taking occasion by the commandment, deceived me, and by it slew me. The law is holy, just, and good, but verse 14, I am carnal, sold under sin. And then he goes with all of those, this is what I want to do, but I don't do it, and what I do, I don't want to do, and so forth. And then he says, verse 17, it's sin that dwells in me. So here you have the king of Ai with Joshua, the leader of Israel. And Joshua means Jehovah is Savior. And the king of Ai is the king of a heap of ruins. Now, what is Joshua going to do? He's already eliminated all of his people, but he has to make an example of this king. And it's one that's pertinent because he reflects the old sin nature. And by the way, they had problems with the old sin nature too. Even though they were saved, they still had to defeat that as well. So it says, in my flesh dwelleth no good thing, for to will is present with me, but how to perform that which is good I know not. So how are we delivered from this body of death? Note, verse number 3 in chapter 8. For what the law could not do, and that it was weak through the flesh, God sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh, and for sin on the cross, condemned sin in the flesh. All right, let's go back to Joshua. Joshua chapter 8. Now here's this king, and you'll note they took him alive. What does that mean? Well, as long as he is alive, he still has potential to do what? Be Israel's enemy, father other children, start a whole new city of Aites, as it were, and destroy Israel, to come back at Israel. And it's the same thing with the old sin nature. As long as he's alive, he has potential to kill us. So, it tells us that they smote, verse number 24, everybody by the edge of the sword. It was that day both men and women were 12,000, even all the men of Ai. And Joshua drew not his hand back, wherewith he stretched out the spear, until he had utterly destroyed all the inhabitants of Ai. We don't have time, but it's an interesting study between the staff of Moses and the spear of Joshua. In two cases, both of these men raised them up until their enemies were defeated. But one was a shepherd's staff and the other was a spear with a point. One was an instrument of care, the other an instrument of war. One, Joshua held it up there the whole time, and the other, Moses needed a little help. And the reason was, of course, the law is weak through the flesh. He couldn't hold it up. It's weak through the flesh. And he had to have help to hold the law, which was the contrast here between the old sin nature. But on the other hand, Joshua is bringing in a whole new system, Jesus, the new covenant with the endowment of the Spirit. He held the spear up until all were defeated without any trouble. Okay, so let's move on here. We're at verse number 28. Joshua burnt Ai and made it a heap forever. Now that's a little play on words. It's a heap of ruins, and so what did Joshua do? He made it a trash heap forever. That's what God is going to do with the old sin nature and all of its products. Even a desolation to this day. Now what did he do to the king of Ai? He hung him on a tree. If you will, hold your place here and turn back to the book of Deuteronomy. Book of Deuteronomy, chapter 21. The old sin nature is cursed of God. They that are in the flesh cannot please God. It is the devoted enemy of everything that God stands for and is. So therefore, Jesus Christ defeated it on the cross of Calvary. How did he do that? Well, just as the king of Ai, was placed on a tree. As a matter of fact, you're holding your place there. Verse number 29. What did he do to this living king? And the king of Ai he hanged on a tree until eventide. Why? Deuteronomy 21, verse 22. If a man have committed a sin worthy of death, and he be to be put to death, you'll hang him on a tree. His body shall remain all night upon a tree, but thou shalt in any wise bury him that day. For he that is hanged is accursed of God, that your land be not defiled, that he's given you for an inheritance. You've got to get rid of the old sin nature. You've got to live on the land apart from the old sin nature. You've got to conquer the old sin nature and call it for what it is. He hanged him on a tree because, and the book of Galatians says, that Christ was made a curse for us, for cursed is everyone that is what? Hung on a tree. So the king of Ai, symbolizing the old sin nature, was placed on this tree and made accursed of God. And that they've got rid of all of the people, and now finally, the man who is their leader, the brains of the outfit, the king. All right. Our time is swiftly moving, but we're going to go through this last part here. Moses told the children of Israel to do something once they entered the land. And it was going to take some time to do it, but he left them some specific instructions, and we will introduce you to these instructions. I don't think we're going to get through it until next time. But specific instructions. They were to build an altar to the Lord once they got in the land by two mountains, Gerizim and Ebal. And at this time they would divide the people and yell out cursings and blessings. All the cursings of the law and all the blessings of the law. Now, here we are, and we're approaching, it's about 5 minutes to 8, and our service is just about over. And I see droopy eyes and furrowed brows. It's hard time staying awake. The day has been long. Many of you have been up since early and so forth. But do you know how long it took? And besides, everybody was there, even the kids. So everybody was there to read everything that Moses wrote in the law. And they had to like it. Okay, let's read these verses and look at some references here, because our time is about up. Joshua built an altar to the Lord God of Israel in Mount Ebal. By the way, Mount Ebal means the bare stone mountain, or symbolizing the law. Gerizim means the cuttings off, or the sanctified ones, the ones that are set apart from the rest. And here's what they did. Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded the children of Israel, as it is written in the book of the law of Moses, an altar of whole stones, over which no man hath lifted any iron, and they offered thereon burnt offerings unto the Lord, and sacrificed peace offerings. Now hold your place here, and let's go back to the book of Exodus, chapter 20, and there's actually one more thing we need to note about this altar. Exodus chapter 20. They were to make an altar to the Lord, but not just any altar would do. Verse 22. The Lord said to Moses, Thou shalt say unto the children of Israel, Ye have seen that I have talked with you from heaven. You'll not make with me gods of silver, neither shall you make you gods of gold. They were not allowed to mold or fashion other similitudes, other images in the likeness of a god or even the god. But you're going to make an altar of earth. This is one type of altar. That you'll make me, and you'll sacrifice thereon thy burnt offerings in all places where I record my name, and I will come and bless you. So that was one type of altar that they could make, the altar of earth. One of the reasons is that God didn't want any images, any phallic images especially. Now here is where we get these next two verses, is where we get the requirements for the altar that Joshua made. And you will make me an altar of stone. Thou shalt not build it of hewn stones. In other words, you couldn't go in there and quarry the stone. You had to find stones in their natural state, the way that God made them, not the way that man made them. Because anytime you have something that man does in this sense, it turns out to be worshipped instead of the true God. It has to be a stone in its natural state. For if you lift up a tool upon it, you have polluted it. So therefore, in order to prevent any type of image or idol making, even out of the stones, and Israel took anything. It didn't matter if it was a stone. It didn't matter if it was a branch of a tree. It didn't matter if it was gold and silver. Anything they could, they would make these things into their idols and worship them. So God said, you can't even hit it with a tool, a hammer, a chisel. You can't have. It has to be natural, whole stones, the way that I have made them. You gather them, but you cannot fashion them. For if you lift a tool upon it, you've polluted it.